She lent her last $20 to a stranger at the train station, never imagining he was a millionaire about to change her life forever. It was an act of pure, desperate kindness, a single choice that would send her spiraling to rock bottom, only to rise again in a way she never thought possible. This is a story about how one small gesture can create ripples that transform everything. You won't believe how this journey of loss, hope, and incredible fate unfolds. If you believe in the power of second chances and stories that restore your faith in humanity, do us a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring stories, and let us know in the comments, what does kindness truly mean in today's world? Now, let our story begin. Grand Central Station was a kingdom of echoes and light, but on that particular afternoon, it felt like a cold, indifferent universe to Grace. The cathedral-like windows wept with a dreary November rain, blurring the city outside into a watercolor of gray and yellow lights. The magnificent chandeliers, which normally inspired awe, seemed to mock her, their brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness closing in on her own life. For Grace, this cavernous hall was merely a waiting room between a past that crumbled and a future that felt terrifyingly uncertain. A cold had seeped through the thin fabric of her coat and settled deep in her bones, a physical manifestation of the despair she fought to keep at bay. The job interview across town wasn't just an appointment. It was a last, fraying thread of hope she was clinging to with all her might. Amidst a cacophony of echoing announcements and the hurried footsteps of strangers on the wet marble floor, a quiet, hesitant voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me." Grace turned, pulled from her thoughts. A man stood a few feet away, his shoulders slumped, the rain soaking into his worn-out tweed coat. His face was shadowed by an unkempt beard, and damp strands of hair were plastered to his forehead. He looked like countless other lost souls swallowed by the city. But then she met his eyes. They were a startlingly clear blue, and in their depths she saw not the cunning of a con man or the emptiness of addiction, but profound, soul-deep weariness. It was an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. It was the look of a man who had been defeated. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said again, his voice hoarse with a tremor he couldn't hide. "My wallet was stolen. I just need $20 for the last train home to Beacon. I swear, if you can just trust me, I'll pay you back." Grace froze, the man's words hanging in the air like frost. The noise of the station, the distant rumble of a train, the murmur of 1,000 conversations, all of it faded into a dull hum. There was only the rain on the glass and the impossible request. $20. In her coat pocket, her cold fingers were already touching the single, worn bill. It was more than just money. It was her lifeline. It was a promise of a small, hot meal after the interview, a brief respite from the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. It was the last tangible piece of a life that still had some semblance of stability. Every rational thought, every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to turn away, to mutter an apology and disappear into the crowd. She owed this man nothing. She had her own battles to fight, her own abyss to avoid. But she didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on him, searching for a reason to justify walking away. Instead, she saw the slight tremble in his hands, chapped and red from the cold. She saw the shame warring with desperation in his eyes. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't demanding. He was simply broken. "Don't you have anyone you can call?" she asked, her own voice barely a whisper against the vastness of the station. He shook his head, a gesture of complete defeat. "Phone's dead. I've been asking, people look right through you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness. Utter, irrational madness. To give away her last shield against total destitution to a stranger was the act of a fool. And yet, a voice from deep within her, a voice that sounded remarkably like her mother's, gentle and unwavering, whispered a simple command: help him. It was the echo of a time when her world was not so harsh, a time when she believed in the intrinsic goodness of people. Without another word, she reached into her pocket. Her hand trembled as she pulled out the bill, the green paper feeling as heavy as a gold brick. For a fleeting second, she hesitated, the bill suspended between her world and his. Then she extended her hand. "I don't know why," she said, her voice soft but clear, "but I believe you. The man stared at the $20 bill in her hand as if it were a burning ember, something too miraculous to be real. His tired, blue eyes lifted to meet hers, and in them, she saw a flicker of disbelief quickly replaced by a wave of profound gratitude that was more powerful than words. He reached out, his callous fingers brushing against hers as he took the money with a reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. The contact was brief, but a jolt of human connection passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of a shared vulnerability. "I promise, I will pay you back," he said, his voice cracking with emotion he could no longer contain. Grace could only manage a small, fragile smile in return. The weight of her decision was already beginning to settle upon her, a cold stone in the pit of her stomach. "Just get home safe," she managed to say, the words feeling thin in the vast, echoing space. He opened his mouth to say more, to give his name, perhaps, or to ask for hers, but the moment was stolen from them. A northbound train screeched into the station, its arrival a deafening hiss of steel and steam that shattered their quiet bubble. The doors slid open, and a wave of people surged forward. The man gave her one last, meaningful nod, a look that conveyed a lifetime of thanks, before turning and being swallowed by the boarding crowd. In seconds he was gone, just another face vanishing into the belly of the train. The doors closed, and just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone from her life. Grace stood motionless on the platform, the damp, chilling wind whipping past her, a stark reminder of the new emptiness in her pocket. That was it. Her last $20 vanished. She didn't even know his name. An automated voice announced the next departure. Her train, her chance. With a heavy heart, she climbed aboard, sank into a vinyl seat by the window, and watched as the rain-streaked platform slid away, taken with it the last remnants of her security. The consequences of her choice arrived before she even reached her destination. The morning after the train station, Grace stood outside the sleek, glass office building in Midtown, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Her hair was still damp from the drizzle, and the hunger in her stomach had sharpened into a painful ache. She was 20 minutes late. The bus had required exact change, a small luxury her empty wallet could no longer afford. She'd been forced to walk, navigating unfamiliar, sprawling avenues as the city rushed past her, indifferent to her plight. By the time she arrived, flushed and breathless, the receptionist offered a smile that was a perfect, polished blend of pity and dismissal. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice smooth and final. "The interviewer had another meeting. You'll have to reschedule." Grace tried to explain, her voice faltering, but the woman had already swiveled back to her computer, the conversation over. She walked out of the building and into the cold, the wind slicing through her coat like a razor. For a long time, she just stood on the sidewalk, watching a world that moved forward with or without her. When she finally made it back to the tiny, rented room that had been her sanctuary, her landlord, Mr. Miller, was waiting by the door. His expression was weary, not cruel. "Rent was due 3 days ago, Grace." "I know, I'm trying." "You said that last week. I can't keep making exceptions. I've got someone else ready to take the room tomorrow. I'm sorry." She didn't argue. There was no fight left in her. She packed what little she owned into a worn backpack. 2 changes of clothes, a cracked phone with a dead battery, and a dog-eared copy of a book her mother used to read to her. That night, she found a forgotten corner in the 24-hour section of the New York Public Library. The fluorescent lights hummed a relentless, buzzing tune, and the air smelled of dust and old paper. She curled into a hard-backed chair, trying to make herself invisible as the security guard gave her a long, knowing look. Her descent had begun. The library, with its artificial warmth and silent crowds, was a temporary reprieve. After 2 nights, the guard who watched her with knowing eyes finally approached, his voice low but firm. "You can't sleep here, miss." "I'm sorry." The apology fell hollow, just another door closing in her face. From there, the city's unforgiving architecture became her bedroom. The benches in Bryant Park were metal and icy, designed to offer rest but not comfort, their cold seeping through her clothes and chilling her to the marrow. She learned to sleep in short, fitful bursts, one eye always open, clutching her backpack to her chest like a shield. The vibrant, pulsating energy of New York, the city that never sleeps became a cruel irony. It was a city that never allowed her to sleep, its sirens and shouts a constant reminder of her precarious existence. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of survival. She wandered through the city's arteries, a ghost among the living, her invisibility a painful paradox. She was unseen by the thousands who rushed past, yet she felt glaringly exposed, her poverty a spotlight she couldn't escape. The word hope began to feel like a foreign word, a cruel joke whispered from a life she no longer recognized. During the long, hungry afternoons, the memory of the man at the station would surface. Unbidden, she would see his tired blue eyes, hear the crack in his voice. Had she been a fool? Was her single act of kindness the tipping point that had pushed her into this abyss? The question gnawed at her, a bitter counterpoint to the hollow ache in her stomach. And yet, beneath the regret, a strange, resilient flicker of peace remained. She had helped someone. In a world that had shown her little mercy, she had chosen to be merciful. It was a small, quiet truth, but in the darkness of her new reality, it was the only light she had left. One evening, as she huddled in a bus shelter, the wind rattling the glass panes, she finally broke. The tears came not as a storm, but as a silent, steady stream, tracing cold paths down her dirt-streaked cheeks. She wasn't crying for the hunger or the cold, but for the profound loneliness that had become her shadow. She missed her mother's warmth, the feeling of being known, of being safe. The sun rose the next morning on a city washed clean by the night's rain, finding her exactly where it had left her, bruised but breathing. She had hit bottom. There was nowhere lower to go. It was a Tuesday morning when she met her, on the very same bench in Bryant Park that had become her unwilling home. The early morning mist clung to the grass, and the city was in a rare moment of quiet contemplation. Grace sat with her knees drawn to her chest, trying to absorb a phantom warmth from the weak sunlight. She hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days, and the world had taken on a hazy, dreamlike quality. Then she noticed a woman. She was elderly, perhaps in her 70s, with a cascade of silver hair pinned neatly under a soft, woolen hat. She moved with quiet grace, a small paper bag held carefully in her gloved hands. She walked with purpose. But as she neared the bench, she paused and looked directly at Grace. Her eyes, framed by a web of fine lines, were filled with a startling clarity and compassion. "You look hungry, dear," the woman said, her voice gentle, devoid of pity or judgment. Grace flinched, the automatic defense of the vulnerable kicking in. "I'm fine," she murmured, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. The woman simply smiled, a kind, knowing expression, and sat down beside her. She placed the paper bag on the bench between them. "I always bring a little extra," she explained softly, "just in case I meet someone who could use it." She opened the bag, and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. Inside was a sandwich, thick and unevenly cut, but filled generously with turkey and cheese. Grace stared at it, her stomach twisting with a painful mix of hunger and pride. "I can't," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Why not?" the woman asked simply. "Is your pride a better meal than the sandwich?" The question was so direct, so gentle, it disarmed her completely. Grace looked away, shame burning her cheeks. The woman waited, patient and silent. Finally, with trembling hands, Grace took the sandwich. The first bite was an explosion of flavor so intense it made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. The woman just nodded, her kind eyes never leaving Grace's face. In that moment, it wasn't just a sandwich she had been given. It was a lifeline. It was a sliver of proof that in a city of millions, she was not entirely invisible after all. As Grace finished the last bite of the sandwich, a warmth that had nothing to do with the food spread through her chest. The elderly woman, who introduced herself as Eleanor, didn't leave. She simply sat with Grace, sharing the quiet morning as if they were old friends. After a comfortable silence, Eleanor spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "There's a soup kitchen over on Monroe Street," she said, gesturing vaguely downtown. "They call it Hope's Table. They serve good lunch, but I know they're always short on help." She turned to look at Grace, her gaze perceptive, You seem like someone who could use more than just a meal. You seem like someone who could use a purpose." The word purpose struck Grace with the force of a physical blow. It was something she hadn't dared to think about for weeks. Her entire existence had been pared down to the singular goal of survival. The idea of having a purpose felt like a luxury from another life. She looked down at her worn clothes, at the dirt beneath her fingernails. "They wouldn't want someone like me," she said, the shame returning. "Nonsense," Eleanor said with gentle firmness. "They want people with good hands and a willing heart. You're both." She stood up, her movement slow but steady. "Ask for a woman named Maria. Tell her Eleanor sent you." And with another kind smile, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of the city as quietly as she had arrived. Grace sat on the bench for a long time, the paper wrapper from the sandwich still clutched in her hand. Hope's Table. The name echoed in her mind. It was a terrifying thought to walk in there, to admit she needed help, to make herself vulnerable again. But Eleanor's words had planted a seed, a purpose. It was a tiny flicker of light in an overwhelming darkness, but it was there. With a deep breath that felt like the first she had taken in days, Grace stood up. She didn't know if they would accept her or what she would even do there. But for the first time in a long time, she was walking toward something, not just away from the cold. Finding Hope's Table took the rest of her morning. It was tucked away on a side street, a modest brick building with a faded sign that was barely legible. The paint was peeling, but someone had placed pots of bright yellow chrysanthemums by the front door, a small, defiant act of beauty. Pushing the door open, Grace was met with a wave of warmth and the rich, comforting smell of simmering vegetable soup and baking bread. It was a scent from a lifetime ago, a scent of home, and it hit her with such force that she had to brace herself against the doorframe. The dining hall was a cacophony of gentle noise, the clatter of spoons against bowls, the low hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. It wasn't the place of silent, grim despair she had imagined. It was alive. She spotted a woman who seemed to be in charge, a no-nonsense figure with her sleeves rolled up, a clipboard in one hand and a ladle in the other. Mustering all her courage, Grace approached her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice small. "I'm looking for Maria." The woman turned, her expression busy and slightly impatient. "I'm Maria. What do you need?" "Eleanor sent me," Grace said, the name feeling like a password to secret world. Maria's face softened instantly. Her sharp eyes scanned Grace from head to toe, but there was no judgment in her gaze, only a deep, weary understanding. "Eleanor has a good eye for people," she said, her voice gruff but kind. "You looking for a meal, or are you willing to work for one?" "To work," Grace answered immediately. A hint of a smile touched Maria's lips. "Good. We need another pair of hands with potatoes." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Grab an apron. We'll feed you after the lunch rush." The next few hours were a blur of motion. Grace peeled potatoes until her hands ached, chopped onions through a veil of tears, and wiped down dozens of tables. Her body moved on autopilot, but her mind was awake in a way it hadn't been for weeks. She watched the people who came to the line, men and women of all ages, their faces etched with the stories of hard lives, but their eyes still holding sparks of dignity. They weren't just a faceless crowd. They were individuals. One man told jokes to everyone in line. A young woman helped an elderly man carry his tray. They were a community, bound by shared hardship, but also by shared humanity. For the first time since she'd lost everything, Grace didn't feel like an outsider. She wasn't someone to be pitied or ignored. Here, with an apron tied around her waist and a mountain of potatoes in front of her, she was simply one of them. She was useful. She had a purpose. Days at Hope's Table turned into weeks. Grace fell into a rhythm, her life governed by the rising of the sun and the daily needs of the kitchen. She became a fixture, arriving before the first pot of coffee was brewed, and often staying until the last dish was dried and put away. The physical exhaustion was immense, but it was a clean, honest ache that she welcomed. It crowded out the despair, leaving little room for self-pity. Maria, seeing her unwavering dedication, began giving her more responsibilities. Grace learned the names of the regulars, their stories, their small triumphs and quiet heartbreaks. She listened, in a world that had rendered her voiceless. She discovered the profound power of offering her ear to others. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to heal. One evening, after the last of the guests had departed, Maria handed her a small, plain envelope. "It's not much," she said. Her usual gruffness softened. "Just a little stipend. You've more than earned it." Grace opened it later, sitting on the steps outside. Inside was $40. It felt like a fortune. It was enough for a room at a women's shelter, a real bed, a hot shower. But more than the money, it was the trust it represented. It was a tangible piece of her life being rebuilt, a recognition that she was no longer invisible. The following Thursday afternoon, the soup kitchen was in its usual post-lunch lull. Grace was wiping down tables, humming a tune she couldn't name, when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, expecting a latecomer or a delivery. A man had stepped inside, and her breath caught in her throat. He was different, yet undeniably the same. He wore a dark, tailored coat that fit him perfectly. His shoes were polished, and his hair, now clean and neatly combed, framed a face that was clean-shaven. The haunted, desperate look was gone. But the eyes were the same. A startlingly clear blue, and they were fixed directly on her. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he took a steady step forward. It was him, the man from the train station. He walked toward her, his step steady and deliberate on the worn linoleum floor. The damp rag slipped from Grace's numb fingers and fell to the floor with a soft splat, a sound that seemed deafening in the sudden silence of the room. Time seemed to slow, her mind scrambling to bridge the impossible gap between the desperate, rain-soaked man at the station and the polished, confident figure standing before her now. "Hello," he said. His voice was completely different, warm, resonant, and calm. It held none of the hoarse desperation she remembered. Grace opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could only stare, taking in the impossible transformation. "You," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. He gave a small, almost sad smile. "I told you I'd pay you back." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've been looking for you. I came back to the station the next day, and the day after that. I asked everyone. No one knew who you were. I didn't even know your name." The sincerity in his voice was disarming. Grace found her footing, bending down to retrieve the fallen rag. The simple action a way to anchor herself in reality. "How did you find me here?" she asked, her voice a little stronger now. "It was a long shot," he admitted. "I started visiting places like this one, making donations, hoping I might get lucky. Something just told me to walk in here today." He looked around the humble dining hall, his gaze finally resting back on her. "You helped me when I was at my lowest. I'd like to return the favor." Grace instinctively shook her head, clutching the damp rag. "That's not why I did it." "I know," he said, and his voice was so gentle it made her heart ache. "That's exactly why I have to." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wallet, a sleek leather wallet that looked like it cost more than she'd earned in a month. From it, he extracted a crisp, new $20 bill. "To settle my debt," he said, holding it out to her. Then he hesitated. "And more than that, I'd like to take you for a coffee. Or dinner. I need to thank you properly. I need to hear your story." Grace looked from the money in his hand to his earnest, blue eyes. Everything about the moment felt surreal, like a scene from a movie she didn't belong in. She was wearing a stained apron. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she smelled faintly of onions and bleach. He looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine, but there was no pity in his eyes, only a deep, unwavering respect. Slowly, she reached out and took the $20 bill. "Okay," she whispered. "Coffee would be nice." They sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe down the street, the kind with mismatched chairs and the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans hanging in the air. Grace was intensely aware of her appearance. The faded jeans, the worn-out sweater, the faint scent of soup that clung to her. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug he had bought for her, a simple black coffee that felt like the most luxurious thing she'd had in months. He introduced himself as Arthur Vance, and he stirred his own coffee with a quiet patience, allowing her the space to compose herself. "You're probably wondering what that was all about," he began, his voice low and steady. Grace gave a small, nervous nod. He reached into his coat again, but this time he pulled out a slim, elegant business card and slid it across the table. Grace picked it up. The name was printed in stark, silver lettering. Arthur Vance, CEO, Vance Innovations. Founder, the Beacon Foundation. She stared at it, her mind refusing to process the words. Vance Innovations. She'd seen the name on buildings, on news reports. They were a tech giant, famous for creating educational software for underprivileged schools. The Beacon Foundation was their philanthropic arm, renowned for its work in homelessness and urban poverty. But at the station, she stammered, looking from the card to his face. A wry, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. I was doing something my board of directors would call incredibly foolish. The foundation was launching a new initiative, and I felt disconnected. I was looking at spreadsheets and data points, not people. I wanted to understand just for a few days what it truly felt like to be invisible, to have nothing. He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto hers. So I went undercover. No phone, no wallet, no ID. I had a small amount of cash, which was stolen on my very first day. He let out a soft laugh. I was truly stranded. And everyone I asked for help, they either ignored me, swore at me, or looked at me like I was something that stepped in. Everyone, he repeated, his voice growing softer. Except you. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the space between them. You had nothing. I could see it in your eyes. And yet, you gave me everything you had. That single act of kindness has haunted me, Grace, in the best way possible. I've met people with immense power and wealth, but none of them have shown the integrity you showed me in that moment. He leaned back, his expression turning serious. That's why I've been looking for you. I'm not just here to pay you back. I'm here to offer you a job. The last 3 words he spoke, offer you a job, seemed to hang in the air, distorting the reality of the small cafe. Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. A job? The concept was so foreign, so laughably out of reach. It felt like a punchline to a cruel joke. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the soup kitchen, to the cot at the shelter, to the simple, brutal calculus of surviving one day at a time. The idea of employment, of a salary, of a future, was a ghost from a past life. A job, she finally echoed, the words tasting like dust. Doing what? I don't have a degree. The last job I had was as a receptionist. Look at me. The words tumbled out, a torrent of insecurity and shame. I've been sleeping on benches and in shelters. What could I possibly offer a foundation run by a CEO? Arthur listened patiently, his gaze never wavering. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch at her confession. When she was finished, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respectful. Grace, he said, his voice calm and firm. I can hire a dozen people with degrees tomorrow. I have a building full of them. What I can't hire is your experience. I can't hire your perspective. You know what it's like to be invisible. You know what it feels like when the system fails you. You know what a simple act of kindness can mean to someone who has lost all hope. He leaned in slightly, his intensity palpable. We create programs, we fund initiatives. But we need people on our team who understand the problems we're trying to solve not from a textbook, but from their bones. We need people with heart. That's what you can offer. She stared into her coffee cup, the dark liquid reflecting her own stunned expression. He wasn't offering her charity. He was offering her a role, a value she couldn't see in herself. For weeks, her past had been a source of shame, a brand of failure. He was telling her it was a qualification. The idea was so revolutionary. It made her head spin. I wouldn't even know where to start, she whispered. You'd start by letting us help you, he said gently. We'll get you a safe place to live. We'll get you settled. Then you'll go through training. You'll learn how we operate. You'll work with our community outreach teams. And you'll tell us what we're doing wrong. You'll help us make our programs better. He offered a small, hopeful smile. Let's change lives, Grace. Starting with yours. For a long moment, Grace said nothing. The cafe buzzed around them, a world away from the silent, monumental decision happening in their small corner. Every instinct she had honed over the past few months screamed that this was too good to be true, a fantasy she would wake up from back on a cold park bench. But then she looked at Arthur. She saw no pity in his eyes, only a steady, unwavering belief. It was the same look of trust he had given her when he took her last $20. He had trusted her then. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him now. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a tear of despair. It was a tear of hope. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that seemed to fill her lungs completely. "Okay," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of her entire future. "Yes, okay." The transformation that followed was dizzying, like stepping from a black and white film into a world of vibrant color. Arthur was true to his word. He didn't just give her a job. He gave her a foundation to rebuild her life. Within a day, she was settled in a small, clean, and wonderfully private corporate apartment. The first night, she stood under the hot spray of the shower for nearly an hour, washing away not just the grime of the streets, but the heavy cloak of invisibility she had been wearing. Her first day at the Beacon Foundation was terrifying. The headquarters was a renovated warehouse in Chelsea, filled with bright open spaces, glass walls, and the energetic hum of passionate people. She felt like an imposter. Her thrift store clothes a stark contrast to the casual professionalism around her. But Arthur introduced her not as a project or a charity case, but as a new consultant for their community initiatives team. He treated her as an equal, and that simple act of respect silenced the whispers of doubt from others, and more importantly, from herself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of learning. She devoured training manuals, sat in on strategy meetings, and shadowed outreach coordinators in the field. She was a sponge, soaking up knowledge about grant writing, program design, and social work. The woman who had been defeated by a bus fare was now learning how to budget for a city-wide food program. It was a surreal, exhilarating, and exhausting climb, but for the first time in forever, Grace felt like she was climbing toward the summit, not just trying to stop herself from falling. The true turning point came about a month into her new life. During a brainstorming session for a new outreach program, Grace found herself sitting at a large conference table, surrounded by bright, well-meaning people with master's degrees and impressive resumes. They were discussing ways to increase engagement at fixed-location shelters. They used words like incentivize, streamline, and optimize. Grace listened silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The ideas were good. They were logical, but they were missing the heart of the problem. She remembered the shame she felt walking into a shelter, the fear of being seen, the heavy weight of admitting defeat. She remembered the long, cold walks to get there, and the countless others she knew who were too proud, too scared, or too tired to make the journey. Arthur, who was leading the meeting, noticed her silence. "Grace," he said, his voice cutting through the corporate jargon. "You've been quiet. What are you thinking?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The old Grace would have shrunk, mumbled that she had nothing to add. But as she looked at Arthur's encouraging face, she thought of the people she left behind on the streets, the faces she knew from Hope's table. Her experience wasn't a weakness. It was her strength. She took a breath and found her voice. "We're asking them to come to us," she said, her voice shaking slightly at first, but growing stronger with every word. "What if we went to them instead? What if we had a van, a mobile soup kitchen, that could go into the neighborhoods, the parks, the underpasses? We could bring them more than just food. We could bring them blankets, information, a friendly face, a connection. We could meet them where they are, without asking them to swallow their pride to get help." A hush fell over the room. The simplicity and power of the idea were undeniable. It was born not from a spreadsheet, but from lived experience. Arthur looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw an immense pride that made her feel 10 feet tall. "That," he said slowly, a smile spreading across his face, "is a brilliant idea. Write up a proposal. You'll lead the project." That moment in the conference room was the true beginning. Grace poured her heart, her pain, and her hope into the proposal. The project, which she named the Open Hands Initiative, was approved unanimously. The Beacon Foundation funded a prototype van, and Grace was no longer just a consultant. She was a project lead. The first time she saw the finished van, painted a warm, welcoming sky blue with the logo of 2 open hands on the side, she stood in the parking lot and cried. They were tears of a different kind, tears of overwhelming gratitude and purpose. Her first night out with the van, she directed the driver to a place she knew all too well, the bus shelter where she had hit rock bottom. That evening, they served over 100 hot meals. But Grace knew it was about more than the food. She moved through the small crowd, not as a benefactor, but as a peer. She learned names, listened to stories, and offered hugs. She saw the same flicker of hope in their eyes that Eleanor had once ignited in hers. The Open Hands initiative grew. 1 van became 3. The project became a lifeline for the city's forgotten, and Grace became his heart. She was no longer the girl from the train station. She was a leader, a voice for the voiceless. Her relationship with Arthur deepened, evolving from mentorship into a quiet, profound partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. A year to the day after she had walked into Hope's table, the foundation held a celebration to mark the success of the Open Hands initiative. The hall was filled with volunteers, city officials, and many of the people the project had helped. Grace, now poised and confident, gave a speech that brought the room to tears. Afterward, Arthur found her by the window, looking out at the glittering city lights. "You did this, Grace," he said softly. "You built this." She smiled. "We built this." He reached into his pocket. "I've been carrying something for a year," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. But before opening it, he also pulled out a crisp $20 bill, the very one she had given him. "This was the best investment I ever made," he said. "It led me to you." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. "You saw value in me when I had nothing to show for it. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much I value you." Tears streamed down Grace's face as she whispered, "Yes." The applause that erupted was for more than just a proposal. It was for a journey that had come full circle. It was for the girl who had given away her last $20 and, in doing so, had found a fortune beyond measure. And so, Grace's story reminds us that our lowest point can often be the foundation for our greatest purpose. A single $20 bill, an act of kindness in the face of despair, didn't just change one life. It changed thousands. It proves that compassion is the most powerful currency we have. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. If Grace's story touched your heart and reminded you of the good in the world, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift the human spirit. And remember, you never know how your own small act of kindness might change the world for someone. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and know that your story matters too.